Hi, this is Katie with Pink Polish Design. Today I have a new watercolor illustration for you called Basking. It's actually one of the illustrations I sketched for Mermaid last month, so it was really fun to watercolor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the weather, how heat and cold can affect your watercolor painting experience. So I live in the Pacific Northwest, and generally our weather is pretty mild. But this last weekend, it was 97 degrees, which for a lot of you, it may not be that hot, but for us here in the Pacific Northwest, that's very warm. So we actually, the reason that there isn't a time lapse of me inking this illustration is because we were having power outages about every 10 minutes for several hours due to the heat. So we actually, I lost that portion of the video because of a power outage. So I actually waited till later in the evening to do this illustration. It was probably 85, 87 degrees when I was doing it. It wasn't too bad. But I thought, I've never actually seen a video that talked much about how the weather can affect your watercolors, so I did a little research. There's not a lot of information out there, but there were a few tips that I thought were pretty cool, so I thought I would share those with you. So let's start with cooler temperatures. I know it might be hard to imagine in the middle of June, but for those of you that like to paint outdoors, painting plein air or architecture, this can be a real problem when temperatures turn frigid. So what do you do when your paint starts freezing? Well, there are a couple additives that you can use in your water that can assist and keep your paint from freezing quite so fast. So first off, you can use ethanol, which you can use an ethanol additive, or you could use a clear liquor such as vodka or gin to add to your water to keep your paint from freezing. If you don't happen to have liquor in your house or have access to that, you can also add glycerin, which will also keep your paint from freezing, because when that water in your paint starts freezing on the page, it can cause your pigments to move in some really unexpected and unintended ways, and really kind of destroy some of that work that you were working so hard to accomplish with watercolors. So use glycerin or ethanol in your water to keep your paint from freezing when those temperatures are really frigid. So humid weather has a very similar suggested solution to very cold weather, in that you add ethanol to your water, because ethanol has a quicker evaporation rate than water. So it will help the water in your paints on the page evaporate even in that very humid weather. Okay, so now let's talk about hot weather and how that can affect your painting experience. So most of us are heading into July and August, and we'll start seeing our hottest temperatures of the year. So how is that going to affect your painting, and what can you do about it? So for me, I start seeing an impact to my painting at about 85 degrees and above, and that might not be super hot, but I do start seeing the water in my paints evaporate much quicker. Now for a piece like this, where I have a lot of small detail, that's okay. I can fill in those areas pretty quickly. But actually the piece I did before this, called Fading Away, had a big area that I was filling in that was someone's back and skirt of a dress, and that was really tough to paint because I was trying to do a nice smooth wash, And as I would lay down paint, as quickly as I would lay it down, it would start evaporating and dry again. And so I was getting streaking and lines where normally I would have a nice smooth flat wash. So what can you do about it? There was a couple of online tips that I haven't tried that I'm eager to. There's actually a sizing method where you size your paper, you get it very, very wet, and you wait about 45 minutes and let the top layer start drying, but the bottom layer remains wet. And I will leave a link to the video I watched on this technique below. It's a really great technique, and I'm eager to try working with my paper still damp. I think that's a really neat concept. So that will help, as your paper will remain wet for longer, and meaning your pigments that you lay down will also remain wet longer. Other people suggest ice in your water because the cooler temperature your water will prevent it from evaporating quite so fast. And if it just won't stop drying more quickly than you can work with it, you can add some gum arabic. So some of the techniques I use myself in this warm weather that I have experience with, I do tend to choose illustrations with more fine detail, things that are segmented. So for example, her hair in this illustration is very segmented. I can go in and deal with one segment at a time, and that's really helpful. I'm not shy about really saturating my paper when I'm trying to do a wash. And I also will, instead of using the technique to do my flat washes by just laying the pigment down and leaving a bead of pigment and water at the edge and pulling that into the next line, I will generally go through and get my paper completely damp in that area and then use that method on top of that. So that helps keep that bead of pigment from drying too quick. And then you can also, I know my paints, my palette can dry out pretty fast, and we actually have a misting bottle here in our studio, so I do use that sometimes to mist down my palette. I also use that when I begin an illustration, as my paints will dry in between painting sessions. And then just short, thin layers in those areas where you're working. So lastly, I want to talk about any weather condition or when you're painting in general. Odd things can happen with your watercolors. That's kind of the nature of watercolors, so be flexible and roll with it. Some of my favorite illustrations have areas where the watercolor didn't quite react like I expected, and that's kind of the beauty of watercolor, is those unexpected reactions. So I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Art prints of this piece are available at pinkpolishdesign.com, as well as the original, which I'll have framed, will be available there shortly. Also, if you like these videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. Not only will you help me make these videos bigger and better and more beautiful, but you'll get great art in the mail too. And lastly, if you like this video, give me a quick thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share with me below how weather impacts your painting experience.